WN, get these season-ending thuds. It sort of gives me the retrospective chance to catch up with people, and this guy's one of my favorite guests to have on. He knows that. You know that. I know it. You know it. The people know it. Formerly at Comcast Sportsnet and all sorts of places, but eternally the fun linebacker from our Super Bowl 35 championship team and the pride of the Bearcats himself, who now has given way to all of his daughters who are Yellow Jackets, and Lord knows what they're going to be in their softball lives. We welcome Brad Jackson in. Mr. Jackson, if you're nasty, but no relation to Lamar Jackson. But watching all this from afar, man, these are the tough days, right? You're questioning the quarterback and the coaching decision and who's going to be the coach. A tough thing to do, to win a division and lose a home playoff game. That never feels good, Brad.
No, it never feels good. You know, the people in Chicago feel the same way when their kicker double doinked the ball off the goal post, and unfortunately, it's the nature of business, it's the nature of sports, and having been in that situation and winning it all as we did in 2000, then coming up a little short in Pittsburgh against a division opponent in 2001, you understand that. So, you know, are there good seasons that you can kind of look at and say, okay, we didn't win it all. Everyone can look in the mirror and maybe hope you get magic in the bottle. But you ultimately know that making the playoffs was probably an achievement that, you know, we didn't really think about, you know, that being those on the outside, former players, analysts, and even some of the people in the building, you know, at the midway point at the bye after the team had lost 3 in a row and they decided to switch to the rookie Lamar Jackson. I think if anyone would have said back then, you're going to have an opportunity to win the division, first time since 2012 here in Baltimore, and have the opportunity to go to the playoffs and host a playoff game, I think a lot of people would have been excited and taken that opportunity had it been presented way back in October. And unfortunately, they came up short at home against a team that they had beaten, 15 days prior.
Brad, looking at it, taking the helmets off it, taking everything apart and saying you've got a decorated 15-year NFL quarterback who's on search of this mission to win a championship that he's never done, maybe the best team he's been surrounded by in these weird circumstances out in your homeland, somewhere out there in the South Bay area of Los Angeles, where I spent Christmas 2 weeks ago eating King's Hawaiian bread, amongst other delicacies to your people out there. But bringing that team, playing at 10 o'clock in the morning, and then you say on the other side, you got the youngest kid to ever start a playoff game, running an offense that they had a chance to see and did a pretty good job against in the second half out in Carson in the sunshine a couple of weeks ago. There were lots of warning signs, there were lots of yellow signs, including Vegas saying, yeah, you're at home. We don't even like your team. Vegas didn't like the Ravens, and I think part of it is just on the outside, you'd say, always take the veteran quarterback in a January game, never take the kid starting his first ever playoff game, that there would be some reason to think that the ball would wind up on the ground a bunch in the first half, and it sort of kind of did, and that would kind of be an eternal script in NFL playoff history now, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really put much stock into first, game versus, veteran game. Joe Flacco in 2008, first playoff game, whether they won or lost. I don't think guys on the other side look at it that it's a rookie. Yeah, as a defensive guy, your coach may say, hey, he's a rookie, we got to hook that. But at this point in time, this late in the season, all the film has been broken down. You're going to go back and look at what a guy does, what a guy doesn't do it. And unfortunately, as I said to many people and said on a couple of different media outlets, the couple of things that concerned me was, as a defensive guy, the unorthodox offense, that not many teams, actually no one else in the NFL is running, that the Ravens ended up leading the National Football League in rushing, was still fresh in the player's mind. It was fresh in the coach's mind because they had just seen it on the 22nd of December out, as you said, at StubHub in Los Angeles. So that is something that you weren't going to be able to trick the guys. The D linemen were going to understand the offensive lineman tendencies, the way they played, the way they lined up. There's a lot of things that we take into it that just aren't X and O's that you can pick up by playing a team. That's why it's difficult to play a team and beat a team 3 times, and you've heard that mantra a couple different times. and it's difficult to beat a team twice, let alone in a matter of 14, 15 days. And you're right, in Vegas, that's what they do. I don't gamble. I don't put much stock into gambling. But the things that also were concerning to me, other than how close in proximity they had played to the game a couple weeks ago into this playoff game, was the number of fumbles that Lamar had, and it was the number of sacks, and not beating up the kid, but those are the numbers. Going into the game, he had fumbled in 12 times in 16 games. He had 10 in the last 7, including 8 games in a row with a fumble. He had he had lost all of them, but the 4 fumbles he had lost, Nestor, ultimately had occurred in the last 4 weeks of the season. And then he had taken 15 sacks in the last 7 weeks. 15. So that included 6 games where he had taken multiple sacks and 5 in a row. So those are the things that were concerning me, and I know I talked about he didn't have any interceptions in the previous 114 attempts, but a lot of times a young quarterback, a rookie quarterback, in order to not make that mistake, he will hold the football, and that allows those sacks to occur, and you can't continually go backwards on first or second down, because the Chargers did a great job of doing what I said would be the formula if they could do it, and that was get the Ravens in 3rd and 6, 3rd and 7 plus, and which was completely opposite of what they had out in Los Angeles when they had 3rd and short, and they completely dominated the game and ran the ball, 36 times for almost 160 yards in that game, which was completely opposite of yesterday, where they were, held ultimately to only 90 yards rushing on 23 attempts.
Well, Brad, this is where I jump in and say I haven't had you on in a month and a half, 2 months. Maybe the last time I had you on, Joe Flacco was still the quarterback. I could look through my phone and say it was probably sometime in October, right? So we haven't talked about this at all. The thing that I have marveled at during December, and it really kind of hit me right around the time they played the Chiefs, which was they're in 2nd and 2 and 2nd and 3 more than any team I've ever seen in the history of watching football, right? Like maybe it's a high school offense. You're running. But when you're getting 6 and 7 and 8 on first down, and you're living in 2nd and 2 and 2nd and 3, and when you actually get the 3rd down and you're converting 46% of your 3rd downs, because you're in 3rd and 1, you're in 3rd and 2, always, all day long, because you're in 2nd and 2, and you can pass out of that down, and you're not getting sacked. And it felt to me like this kid would never get sacked, and here come the Chargers and sack him 7 times. I mean, it really speaks volumes to what the offensive line is, and I know the fans were yelling for Joe Flacco on Sunday, and that just seems sort of absurd when he hasn't thrown the football with this offense or anything like this offense in 2.5 months. It seems a little crazy, but there's the fact that Lamar couldn't avoid the rush when that's what he does, and I elbowed Luke in the 3rd quarter. I said, their best play is just to have him fake like he's going to pass and run the 11th grade offense at high school, because him fading back to pass, this O-line's not built to pass protect him. And the way the Chargers went so athletic defensively, I hate to say out-coached or whatever, but it felt like the Chargers had a hell of a game plan coming in to make him play left-handed all day long, and he wasn't prepared to do that. And to your point, in the linebackers room, it's you poke at the ball, he'll drop the ball, and that's going to follow him all offseason. That's going to follow him for 16 games next year, too.
Yeah, and again, you hate to say, but it's the reality. That's what coaching is. We talk about Bill Belichick. You talk about Anthony Lynn, the fact that they brought in another safety to kind of keep and be able to not run with, but at least run down and contain Lamar Jackson. So they did get out coached, and unfortunately, there was no adjustment. I'm not beating anybody up, but that's the reality. This is what we do as players. This is what the coaches do. That's why players and coaches get the money. It's the adjustments in the game make the difference in a football game as a player and a coach. That's where coaches make their money. Coaches make their money on Sundays because now they have to come over and say, hey, you know what? They're outsmarted us. We have to go to the game plan and do what they did later in the 4th quarter. And I know the Chargers were kind of playing a little bit softer when they were down 23-3. But at the end of the day, Lamar Jackson still was able to throw the football and make plays. Yes, he ran yards at Louisville, but he also had the ability to throw the football for a lot of yards, which is why he won the Heisman and set records at Louisville. So, yes, can he throw the football? Absolutely. Does his accuracy need to improve? No question. The fact that they waited until the fourth quarter to decide, let's go to 2 minutes, let's give him some easy passes, let's allow him to run around and plays in the simple passing game, nothing that had to require him to sit there on a 5 and a 7-step drop. That's getting out coached. I'm sorry, there is no other way. They came into this game with the same identical running play, pulling the backside tackles, pulling the guards. They didn't change any of the blocking schemes up that they were successful on the 22nd of December that allowed them to do what they did in the National Football League, which was control the time of possession, which keeps Phillip Rivers, that offense, and them on the bench and not allow them to put your defense at risk. The Ravens had 1 sack defensively, and a lot of that had to do with they were on the field and they kind of figured them out. So, yeah, the offensive side of the football, they got out-coached. No, there's nothing else you can say about it. They did make the adjustments that was needed to make. But more importantly, the offensive line, you're right, Nestor. It didn't matter if Joe Montana, Johnny Unitas, or Joe Flacco were back there. They were going to get hunted. The Chargers, they just brought so much heat on that offensive line. The offensive line played the one game that they played all season. They weren't physical. They got taken behind the woodshed. They couldn't block anybody. They couldn't stop anybody from rushing and beating up the quarterback because even when they didn't get the sacks, Lamar was taking some very big hits, as he was throwing the football or even when he had just got rid of it. And that's a credit, again, to the defensive staff, the head coach Anthony Lynn out there, Gus Bradley, the defensive coordinator for the Los Angeles Chargers, of coming in with a game plan and the players executing that game plan. But the offensive line was bad. Special teams were bad. Coaching was bad. The players were bad. The penalties, the undisciplined, penalties, that they had on offense and defense. Ronnie Stanley had a couple of costly penalties. He had been pretty good all year. You can't have those penalties in a playoff game. And that's the inexperience of guys who have been here and being young and not playing playoff games.
Well, 1st and 20 and 2nd and 14, none of that is doable. Brad Jackson is here, of course, former Raven linebacker and multi-time analyst, as well as coach deep down. So the Flacco part of this to Jackson, obviously it smells great. It worked out great. It was brought about by losing and all that. Where do you stand on the Flacco side? Is he going to go somewhere else and win football games, Brad? You going to bet on him or against him in Miami or Jacksonville or Washington or wherever it's going to be?
Well, he won't be with the Ravens, and John Harbaugh made that very clear in his press conference yesterday that when he said Joe Flacco, we'll play and win a lot of football games in the National Football League, and he's cheering for Joe. He just said he wasn't cheering for Joe, here anymore. So, and he said he's in Joe's corner, and he will cheer for Joe, except if they play the Ravens. So the Joe Flacco era is over in Baltimore. There's no question about it. He flat out said Lamar Jackson, is our quarterback moving forward. So there's no way Joe Flacco, 1, is going to stay here. 2, they can't afford it. On the salary cap wise. And, they did what wasn't expected. The Ravens made the playoff with the switch to Lamar Jackson, unconventional offense, and it saved Coach Harbaugh's job. It saved Marty Morningweg's job. It saved a lot of other people's jobs. So they're going to move forward with that. And it's going to be a very, very important offseason in minicamp. In training camp for Lamar Jackson and his offense. And, he's going to have to work his tail off. And unfortunately for Joe, that's the nature of football. Joe Montana, one of the greatest quarterbacks ever, finished his career outside San Francisco. Jerry Rice, the greatest wide receiver ever, finished his career outside of San Francisco. So there's very few people that will start and finish their career like Ray Lewis did here in Baltimore. Terrell Suggs, it will be interesting to see if he finishes his career wearing the purple and black if they decide to give him another 1 or 2 year deal because he said he wants to play some more. And he may not finish his career here, but that's the nature of the business, unfortunately. And, yes, I see Joe having 3 pretty, places to go, Jacksonville, Washington, and Denver. Obviously Denver's blocking Coach Kubiak from getting interviewed from Arizona to New York Jets. They have a working relationship. Denver doesn't have a quarterback. that's a lot of pressure to play under John Elway. I've been out there in the building in 2013, helping the defensive guys when Jack Del Rio was the defensive coordinator as an intern. So I understand, what it's like being in the building and, the two-time Super Bowl winning quarterback and legend and Hall of Famer John Elway is the boss. It's a great demand on that offense, which is why, unfortunately, they fired a good coach in Vance Joseph, and he had 7 quarterbacks, 7 last 2 years. So, unfortunately, Joe Flacco will no longer be a Raven. He's probably, in no question, the greatest quarterback in Ravens history. His numbers dictate that. Bowl MVP and the second World Championship brought to the city, and one day he'll be in the Ring of Honor as well. So, but that's the business, and the Ravens are going to move on. And it's going to be challenging, for a lot of people this offseason and obviously next year because, as I said, Nestor, you can't come into the NFL next year when coaches have had the entire offseason to break down and come up with game plans to run and try to defend that offense because you'll see a lot more of what Anthony Lynn and defensive coordinator Gus Bradley of the Chargers did, and you'll even see some other things internally, especially in the division, with teams you have to play twice a year.
Well, a lot of guys like you take umbrage to that, right? It pisses you off as a linebacker that they're going to come in here and run a Pop Warner offense and think they're going to move the sticks 6 times down the field on us over 14 plays. That doesn't sit well in defensive rooms, right?
No, absolutely. Coordinators get fired for it. Like you can't have, and I wouldn't say Pop Warner. It's just unconventional. They're just doing a lot of the RPOs, which basically a lot of the read option. They're just taking the pass out of the RPO. For your listeners, the RPO is run pass option. They take the P out and they're just run option run. And, it's more of the true read option of a college style offense. So, with an athletic quarterback, that has to mature and has to work on his accuracy, and I have no question he has the talent to do it. We're just going to see if he's develops that, and he has to work on, his ability, to not lose the ball in the pockets and in traffic. Quarterbacks work on those things, and that's something that one of these coaches, and the new collective bargaining agreement for your listeners, and this, Nestor, this is where it hampers the progression and the development of young players because the new collective bargaining agreement says that once the Ravens leave the building here at the end of the week, there's no contact between the players and the coaches unless you're a new coaching staff. There's no contact between the players and the coaches until
April.
Until April. So now this young quarterback that you need to be in the building to watch film, to break down film, to go inside the indoor bubble, to kind of just walk through some things visually and get it and work on throwing, put the old school buckets up and have the quarterbacks throw at the buckets and get a couple of the ball boys and equipment managers that are hanging around to get them to go stand at certain spots. You don't get that extra work. He's going to be back in Florida, where he's from, and he'll work out with a bunch of guys, but there's no coach that's going to be there. James Urban, the quarterback coach, is going to be there. Marty Morningway is not going to be there. Harbaugh may or may not, even if he's not the head coach, whoever the head coach is, I'd be very shocked if it wasn't John Harbaugh. They're not going to be there to help this young quarterback get that much important and much needed work in January, February, March, and until off-season program begins in April. That's 3.5 months that this kid is not going to be able to develop, unfortunately. So, but that's what the players wanted. They argued for that time off. They didn't want coaches to call them, and it's just a new NFL that I don't understand. This is your job. This is your occupation. Winning is difficult. How do you not want to get better? But unfortunately, that's in the collective bargaining agreement until the next agreement comes up. And I know a lot of coaches are frustrated because they can't do what's needed to be done. It was important for us, Nestor, in the off season, and guys weren't here all the time. But we had constant communication with Marvin Lewis and Jack Del Rio and Rex Ryan. We had constant communication. They would send us film. We would break down. You would have phone.
That's what made Ray a better football player, right? It's what made young Ed Reed a better football player, right?
No question. We would get together. I remember, we would come up and say we'd come and work out, for a couple weeks here in Baltimore, and then we would be in there in the coaches' meetings watching film with the coaches, going as they were breaking down the opponents for next year. So you already had, a head start on it, and then we'd be doing the extra stuff. Jack Del Rio would take us in the old bubble where the weight room and the turf were combined out, in Owings Mills, and we would walk through some things with trash cans as offensive linemen, and there's no substitute for that extra work and that side of the game that unfortunately is missing, which is why tackling is an abomination in the National Football League, and there's just not the development of the young players as it should be, which is why a lot of teams and a lot of players never reach their potential.
Brad Jackson here. Mr. Jackson, if you're nasty as well. Last thing for you, Brad. Los Angeles. What high school? You're from Anaheim, is that right? Like that area?
Anaheim, Catella.
So like Catella Avenue. I've passed that on the 405, I think, or the 5. I'm not sure. So,
yeah.
I spent 3-4 days down in that part of the world, and I'm in L.A. Look, I've been going to L.A. for 35 years. I mean, back in the 80s, I went to L.A., and back when they had 2 football teams, and they didn't have any, and it's sort of fascinating that there's 2 teams this weekend from Los Angeles going to be competing in the playoffs. I mean, you are the embodiment of the kid that sort of grew up during the era where they both sort of disappeared, right?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up as a child. We had the Los Angeles Rams initially. That was 2 blocks away from our apartment at in Anaheim at the old A, we called it, where also, the Angels played. So I grew up watching, obviously, Eric Dickerson and the old Rams, and also the Freddie Lynns, the Red Jackson, the Donnie Moores. Those guys are the Angels, and that's where my love of baseball came into during the summers. And then, of course, the Dodgers. But we were Dodgers fans growing up because of Jackie Robinson, and that's what my uncles. And so it was more of a big deal to go all the way to Chavez Ravine and, and then obviously the Kirk Gibson home run, being a Dodgers fan, but just the excitement of that moment. I still remember, sitting on the floor.
Oh, I remember that moment of my life. Everybody's
watching
a sports
it live.
fan, sure.
I know exactly what still to this moment.
Man, how can I know you all these years and not know this about you? How can you and I have never had this conversation? This is kind of fun.
I know, yeah.
Wow.
So that's where my love is. And then, of course, the Raiders. I mean, I was a big Raiders fan growing up because at the time they were in Oakland, then they were in Los Angeles, and then they ended up leaving to go back to Oakland during my lifetime. So that's why when a lot of fans are, kind of arguing and going back and forth about teams, I completely understand it. We had the Rams leave, and we had the Raiders come and go twice. So, they were gone, and then they came back, and then they left again. So, completely understand it as far as how that could be painful for, how it was for a lot of the Colts, the old Colts fans, and what that was like, for them losing their team. Obviously, the situation in the middle of the night was probably a little bit, shocking. And, the Mayflowers that I remember growing up was, thinking like, man, look at all that snow, and had never seen snow at that time. That a whole team just picked up in the middle of the night, which was awkward. But, the Ravens have done a good job, I think, led by, all the teams, and especially our team from 2000 to kind of help seal that wound that the Colts put there. And putting Baltimore back on the map, establishing the Ravens as a franchise with the World Championship, and then what the 2012 team was able to do, and this team going forward. And so, we'll see, obviously, if Coach Harbaugh leads it. I firmly believe that him and Mr. Bisciotti, they're a marriage. They may be sleeping, in 2 separate bedrooms, so to speak, but I'm sure in these next 48 hours they'll figure it out. And be able to come to some sort of agreement. I don't put much stock into the BS that some team is going to trade for Coach Harbaugh for 2 first-rounders. That didn't work out for Tampa Bay. I guess it did because they won the championship, but we all know that was Tony Dungy's team. And all John Gruden had to do was make sure the cake didn't burn that Coach Dungy had already put in the oven, because that team was already on its way to winning the championship. And obviously, Coach Harbaugh, Coach Gruden is still, living off of Coach Dungy's team with his new deal and the debacle that's the Oakland Raiders, or whatever they're going to be called now. So I firmly believe that Coach Harbaugh will be here. I think that's probably more of maybe the agent or some friends in the media putting that out there to, kind of get maybe another 1 or 2 years on the extension and maybe a little bit more money so he can get close to making the money that his brother Jim is making at Michigan. But I don't see any team doing that. I don't see Mr. Bisciotti doing that, trading his coach, because now it sets your franchise back. Now you have to find another coach and a coordinator and go through all that. And you see a whole bunch of teams going through that rat race right now, trying to figure out who's going to be their coach. And then you're going to have position coaches and coordinators. And there's no way you're going to do that with a team that has the stability of going to the playoffs. No matter how ugly it was getting there, they still made the playoffs and were division champs.
Brad, hang in there, man. I know you got your own coaching thing with all these kids running around playing sports as you're doing back and forth to Atlanta.
Just one now. I got nothing. I'm just a fan now. The youngest is gone. She's started practice Saturday or yesterday rather, back at Georgia Tech. So I'm looking forward to February 8th, the first tournament in Jacksonville, Florida, and then hopefully it takes us all the way through the NCAA tournament and into May and June. And so every Wednesday and every weekend, I'll be watching softball somewhere across this country in Georgia Tech softball. So to hell with Georgia is the saying that they say down there. So, go Jackets and to hell with Georgia.
I will be spending 9 glorious nights in Atlanta, Georgia later on in the month. I was hoping it would be wearing a purple boa, but I'll be on Radio Row down there. So hope to see you if you're running around down there in a couple weeks, Brad.
Enjoy. Sounds good. Happy New Year.
Brad Jackson, Super Bowl champion from the Super Bowl 35 Ravens, joining us here in the aftermath of the disappointment of the Ravens finale against the San Diego, Los Angeles, Carson Chargers, who are now headed to Foxborough to take on the New England, Boston, Providence Patriots, who almost wound up in Connecticut at one point. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. I am out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.